I don't say the first because that's the first place we go. In fact, in many respects, it's the last place we would go. But it is, you know, it is sort of typical budget form to put the revenues at the top and the expenditures below. And so I follow that pattern here. And tuition is by far the revenue that we're able to adjust most directly and produce the most revenue from. This tuition increase that we have in our mitigation plan includes a 5% tuition increase at the community colleges for next fall. There's already a 3% tuition and fee increase for the universities in place for next fall compared to the current academic year. We would not propose changing that because of the time. It's too late in the registration cycle at the universities for us to be able to fairly impose additional tuition and fees. But the colleges, because they tend to have registration occurs much later, and the vast majority of students haven't paid for their tuition for the fall. At this point, we believe that we could still implement a tuition increase for the community colleges if necessary. The tuition increases at the community colleges don't generate a lot of money. They generate less than $1 million for each percent increase in tuition and fees. So you can see $3.9 million would be a 5% tuition increase at the community colleges. In the second year, we proposed, well, not proposed, we identified as a potential option, if necessary, that the entire system could increase tuition by 5%, which would generate about $31 million. There are also some enrollment initiatives that individual institutions suggested. These are things where they new academic programs that some of the universities have, that they're working on that they think they could push out into the marketplace, and that would generate new enrollment by offering a new graduate program or a new online program or something that they think would be attractive to new students and would drive some enrollment. We've included the projections for those in that second row. The other column. Those are a couple things. One is interest rates are much higher. So we do actually have some cash that we invest in. We have a little bit of operating money that we keep in the bank. And so we get a little bit of interest from that. So that's one item that interest is improving. So we think we could gain a little interest income. It's negative in the second year because some of the program cuts that were proposed would result in reduced revenue. And so we've added that in as an offset there. You can see those revenue options are not very large. I mean, even a 5% tuition increase every year raises $30 million. That's a lot of money, but compared to a $100 million deficit, it's not a lot. I mean, it's not enough. Tuition increases would have to be, in order to solve a $100 million problem through tuition increases, you would have to raise tuition very, very profoundly in ways that I believe would impact your alls and your fellow students' ability to afford us and would depress enrollment, therefore undermining the whole value of trying to raise revenue through tuition increases. I have no idea whether a 5% tuition increase would dramatic. I should say this. I know that even a 5% tuition increase will reduce demand would reduce enrollment. I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity yet to take Introduction to Microeconomics, a course that I took as an undergraduate. And then another version of it as a graduate student. And they were very clear in that class that when price goes up, demand goes down. And even in higher education, that is true. So we're very reluctant. I'm very interested in feedback from you about whether a 5% tuition increase is something that you would see as tolerable or not, and whether that is preferable to deeper cuts in the institutions. Those are difficult decisions that the Board of Regents is ultimately going to have to make, and I'm sure they would welcome contributions and ideas from you all about that. Expenditure options, things that we could do to cut spending. The first is eliminating unfilled vacancies. So it's essentially attrition. There are a lot of vacant positions that we have a lot of employees, 14,000 employees. So by not filling vacant positions that exist now and not filling vacant positions that occur during the year, we can save quite a bit of money. And this is an estimate of what we think that attrition could be. This wouldn't be a hard hiring freeze. There's some positions that we need to have. We need to have certain students facing service. People who serve students. We need to make sure that there are somebody in the front of every classroom that we've scheduled, who's qualified and doing a good job teaching. So there are certain things we need to hire, and we would prioritize those. But there are, we think we could probably leave, we could achieve these savings through leaving position vacant. We've also built in layoffs, which are extremely difficult to do in higher education. We have a unionized workforce. The layoffs are, in any circumstances, are disruptive to the organization, extremely disruptive to the individuals who are impacted by them, and by the people who are left in the organization. There are a lot of reasons why layoffs are an unattractive option, but they might be necessary. The reason that you see big savings in the second year, not the first, is because, again, our collective bargaining agreements require long notice, and also because the mission and the work that we do often requires long notice, that we have teach out requirements. We can't lay off faculty who have teaching loads that are necessary to be carried out. So it takes a fairly long time to adjust the expectations and schedules so that we could achieve those savings. In addition, we have savings from reducing part-time and adjunct staff. This is something that, essentially, I'm sure some of you have from time to time encountered a class that was initially scheduled but then was canceled because of low enrollment. That happens in any institution normally. But if the tolerance for low enrolled classes is adjusted, and you make more affirmative efforts to consolidate sections and ensure that classes are fully enrolled, which means larger classes for students, we can reduce the number of part-time and adjunct faculty that we employ at the colleges and universities. And the savings that we project are shown here, about $40 million a year. And then there are other reductions. These are specific programs that we would get out of, that we would stop doing, both academic programs and student support programs. Things that we do that are a little outside of our mission, workforce training programs that are losing money, other specific items that we think are maybe a little outside of our core mission that we could stop doing. But I say that knowing that just because they're outside of our core mission doesn't mean that they're not important to members of our community. I'll put out there one of the things that's been, we've looked at the value of is campus daycare. We provide daycare on a number of our campuses. It's very expensive. We lose a lot of money on that, and yet to the students and faculty and staff who rely on that daycare, it's very critical, and it's part of the work that we do that we would love to continue to do because it's important to the state of Connecticut and it's important to our community. But is it as important as our instruction of students? No, that's our core mission. And so, elimination of that is an example of the kinds of other reductions that we had identified. All told, those changes that you see would reduce our deficit down to $7 and $20 million. Obviously, this is not a precise science, so that struck me as an appropriate deficit mitigation plan. I'm hoping that we will see improvement in the budget that is at least as big as those remaining deficits and hopefully much larger, and so that we don't have to carry out all these steps. If we did have to carry those out, and I'm just putting this out here because I want to be transparent about what we put on the table. If we did end up carrying out those plans, we estimated the number of layoffs of full-time and part-time faculty and staff that would need to happen in order to carry out those options listed above. It's about 650 cumulative full-time layoffs and about just under 3,000 part-time positions that would be eliminated. Faculty and staff. Now, remember, we have 14,000 employees. We have about 4,000 full-time employees and about 9 or 10,000 part-time employees in our system today. So we're very large, and so these numbers are, should be taken in context. But even in the context of 4,000 employees, to lay off 650 of them is 15%. And is a significant would entail a significant disruption to our organization, and obviously disruption to the lives of the individuals who are impacted. And obviously, they are doing work now to serve students. They're teaching classes. They're administering student support services, back office functions that are necessary. And so the loss of those folks would diminish the services that you get, and would certainly make it, there would be fewer courses and more time involved with receiving any service from the institutions that you attend. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Enough of the depressing table. Again, so right now we're hoping that the legislature will significantly increase the proposed funding levels. I have reason to believe that the leadership in both the House and Senate are supportive of increasing funding to us. They are also, however, supportive of increasing funding to other groups, the nursing home workers, the home care workers, the group homes that serve the developmentally disabled, K-12 school districts. These are all groups that have raised the issue of needing more money than was in the budget, and have significant impact. These are all big ticket items in the state budget, and we're not the only one out there. So I want to make it clear that it's not that their budget was perfect, except that it was $100 million short for CSCU. It was $100 million short for a lot of folks, and a lot of them are out there asking for the money, and we are too. I think we make a better case than some of them, and I think that we certainly are well regarded by the legislature, who understands the value of what we do for you, and they want to fix this. They may not be able to, because they need to. There are some. Anytime there's a budget act, it's, remember that how does a bill become a law? Little video. I hope some of you have seen it. I saw it years ago. The governor has to sign this thing at the end of the day. The legislature passes a bill, and then it goes to the governor's desk, and he has to sign it. Practically, what that means is that the legislature must negotiate the final budget with the governor so that they all have agreement. I mean, they don't. They do not have supermajorities in both chambers. Well, they might be able to generate a supermajority, but in order to pass a budget without the governor, they need 60% of each chamber to vote for the budget, to have what they call a veto-proof majority. The Democratic caucuses, which are the majority in both chambers, I think are technically large enough to produce a supermajority in the Senate, but not likely in the House. And when you consider that the Democratic caucus includes a number of more centrist members in both chambers, who would be unlikely to override a governor's veto on a budget like this, it seems inevitable that the final product will be the outcome of negotiations between the governor and the legislature. Moreover, the legislature adopted early this session an extension of what they call the guardrails. And this is a series of legal provisions that restrict how much money the state can spend each year. There's a spending cap, there's a appropriations cap, there's something called a volatility cap. There's a whole series of provisions that either divert revenue into reserves or into paying for unfunded liabilities, or restrict the amount of money that the legislature can appropriate each year. There is a little bit of room left for them to appropriate, and that got a little bit better because revenues seem to be getting better. So they have a little bit of room under that cap, but not enough to meet all the needs of the budget. So they are either going to have to make decisions about which items get funded within the spending cap, or they're going to have to agree on some kind of strategy to work around the spending cap. There's a long history that I can attest to of the legislature finding ways to spend a little bit more than the rules normally would allow them to do. They can do that by, doing revenue diversions where they set aside certain revenues and directly pay for certain activities. They can, well, I don't need to go into the technical details. There are a number of different approaches that they could take, but they would need to have agreement from the governor to do that. The governor has been reluctant to make, I mean, I have not heard him make any public statements that suggest he is willing to do any of those things, which is discouraging. On the other hand, one of my lessons that I've learned about politics over the years is that when people are compelled to do something that they don't really want to do because of political support, which is what we're hoping will happen with the governor on this particular question, that he will ultimately accept something that he doesn't really want to do because of the political pressure to do so. People seldom, they're opposed to something until they change their mind, and then they're opposed, and then they're in favor of it or whatever. You're not going to see too many hints about it. I think there will be a change, and he will accept something in negotiations, and we're not likely to see too much public softening in his language prior to that. So we're left sort of like the devout Catholics in St. Peter's Square waiting for the smoke to come out of the chimney to indicate that they've picked a new pope. It's one of my favorite images for the budget process. There are some people in the room, and all the rest of us are waiting outside, waiting for them to tell us what they've decided. Now we're sending messages in the room all the time and calling people and working with our legislative supporters to make sure that we get a good outcome. But ultimately, it's a negotiation happening by other people in a room that we're not in, and we'll find out how much happens here. A last thing I'll say is once we find out, which may be as late as June 7th, but maybe this afternoon or tomorrow. Probably not this afternoon. They tend to not work too hard on beautiful Friday afternoons, but they might. You never know. I don't believe they're meeting today. I kind of keep track of when they're having negotiations. It's possible next week, or it's possible that a couple weeks down the road they'll announce something. At that point, we've been developing budgets based on this appropriations committee budget, and we will have to sort of make adjustments one way or the other based on what gets finally adopted, and then we will bring that to the Board of Regents during the June process. So there's a finance committee meeting in June 21st. There's a full board meeting on June 29th, I believe, that will, or maybe the 28th, I can't remember, that will, where we will, the board must enact a spending plan for next year. We don't have the authority to spend money unless the board gives us that authority after June 30th. So we will certainly do that. We may, depending on what happens with the budget, that process may be easier or more difficult. We may end up not fully resolving all of the deficit in June. We may have to go back for budget revisions as we continue to work, especially if they're deep cuts. It may take us a little bit more time to work out exactly how to implement those cuts. And so we may end up having to go back to the board again later in the summer to get them to make adjustments. The one thing I will say is that if the cuts are significant and it's necessary to raise tuition at the community colleges, I think we would do that in June, just because we need to be able to establish those rates so we can, set up financial aid packages for students and, bill the payers, whether it's the PACT program or the, individual students and their families or Pell or what have you. So we would need to establish tuition rates in June. Right now, we have the authority to go forward with no increases, but we might have to take that action in June if there are deep cuts. I'm not it's quite possible that the legislature, if they give us a lot of money, will require us, either formally or informally, which we would honor, not to raise tuition. The legislature is very much on your side, I think, on the issue of tuition increases and don't want to see us raise tuition. On the other hand, we've been paying, the state gave us a large raise, well, not that large, but over time they accumulate and become large numbers. We've been paying raises for the last couple of years, and we'll have to pay raises to all of our employees on July 1. Those raises cost us about $30 million. And so far, the state has been paying for about half of that, and not the entire cost of those raises. So even just to pay that, we will need to, it's very difficult for us to continue to pay our staff without raising tuition every year, under this current system that the state supports us under. So I think that there will be, it would require a very generous and somewhat unexpected increase in state assistance for us to be able to agree to a tuition freeze anywhere in the system during this upcoming biennium. But it's not out of the question, and we certainly have given the information to the legislature that you see here, and even a little bit more detail, so they know what they would need to give us if they really want us to hold tuition flat. So we're hoping for the best. We're continuing to stay. I make my calls every couple days. I call around to the appropriations chairs and the leadership, and we're making sure that they don't forget about us as they go through this budget negotiation. And you and your colleagues as fellow students and faculty and staff have also been making calls and sending emails and sending letters, and I appreciate all that. I think that we're in their mind, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. So I'm happy to take any questions about this. I'm sorry to have gone on for 45 minutes. That was a little longer than I intended, but I'd rather have you know the details so that you can understand what we're trying to do, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I was gonna say, thank you so much, Ben, because I know it's a lot, but it's all important information. Um, but yeah, any questions? I can't see everyone, by the way. I don't know why it's only showing me like 6 people. So if your hand's up, you can just unmute and go for it. Uh,
Um, I have a question. I'm Venetia from Middlesex Community College.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Barnes. I wanted to ask you, how would scholarships work, private scholarships that each campus gets for students? Like how, would they be combined as a whole, or how would that work? Do you know?
Well, there are a number of different categories of financial aid. So I'll start with the community college context. In the community colleges, um, we establish tuition and then we apply. So every student, if you're a full-time student, it's I think 4,800 is the tuition for a full year in the community colleges, more or less right now. Carrie will correct me if I'm wrong about that, my recollection off the top of my head. But if there
It's
is
a little bit lower. It's a little bit lower. Currently, it's 4176 for full-time students with fees of 524, so it's about 4,700 with fees.
Okay, so 4,700 is the current tuition and fees, and we charge every student that amount, but then we apply financial aid from various sources against that. So if you get a full Pell Grant, the Pell Grant is actually larger than that. So you would fully cover your tuition and fees and get a little bit of cash back that you could use to pay for books and transportation and the like. Similarly, if you get a PACT grant, if you're a full-time student and you're PACT eligible, the state funds would then be brought to bear to cover your tuition and fees. If you've gotten a private scholarship from the local civic organization or your family's employer, I mean there are a number of private groups that provide scholarships. Those would be applied. Obviously if tuition is higher, it would be the relative value of that financial aid might be reduced, but you would still get those funds. We also have something called institutional aid, which I think may be what you were referring to. So we have a policy at the Board of Regents that a minimum of 15% of every tuition dollar that we raise is set aside for what we call institutional aid. And that is packaged typically based on financial need and given to students to help them afford school. So the all those sources of financial aid would continue to be in place, but in some cases, because as the tuition increases, for instance, if you're a Pell student right now, you would get back, I think it's about $1,000 because the Pell grant is about $1,000 higher than our tuition and fees. So you would get that money back to cover other costs of attendance. If the tuition and fees go up, the amount of money you get back will be lower. Similarly with the PACT program, with PACT, it's actually based on full tuition. So PACT would be, it wouldn't really make any difference. Again, all these things, the higher the tuition and fees, the more likely that you would have some out-of-pocket costs, or those out-of-pocket costs that you have would grow. At the universities, there's much more out-of-pocket costs. Most students at the universities end up paying more, either through loans or, money that you've earned or money that your family's able to contribute. So as tuition rises, typically the out-of-pocket costs are going to go up in a commensurate way. So if you have a package from Southern that provides you where you end up having to pay or borrow $8,000 a year for tuition and fees, that number would probably rise because the increases in overall tuition and fees would not be offset fully by increases in financial aid because some of those financial aid sources are fixed.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that answer your question,
Yeah.
Anisha? I hope it did.
I was actually curious about how the consolidation would affect such grants, but then yes, I sort of get the point. Thank you.
Louis had your hand up.
Yeah. Hey everyone. I was just wondering, do we know what faculty exactly are potentially, if the budget doesn't get approved, are going to be laid off? And yeah, I was just wondering where those cuts are going to be made in, or do we have a rough estimate of which schools those faculty are going to be affecting?
Yes, that's a good question. I don't know, individuals, there's a whole process. Well, we have 3 collective bargaining agreements that cover faculty and several that affect staff. Each of those is a little bit different, and there are very specific requirements for how to go about identifying faculty and staff for layoff in the event that that's necessary. And we would go through that process. And that process has opportunities for us to identify alternatives and for us to negotiate resolutions and to find ways to avoid layoffs. Obviously, we're going to follow that. We don't want to lay people off. So that process would have to occur, and that would produce the outcome of specifics. In terms of which institutions these are going to affect, the majority of the deficit in the first year is at the community colleges. I'm just being, we're still working on our budget, and we're hoping to resolve that. And I know Carrie and I have spent a lot of time talking and reviewing the information at the community colleges. They're working very hard to find ways to reduce that shortfall that don't harm students. But there clearly would be a significant impact on students at the community college. On faculty and staffing levels at the community colleges. They also, you would probably, because of the way that their collective bargaining agreements work, and because they rely much more heavily on part-time faculty at the community colleges, there would probably be more impacts right away. At the universities, they have a long notice periods, and their reliance on you know, only about 20% of sections are taught by adjuncts in the at the universities, and that number is 50 or 60% at the colleges. So, and because obviously the contract, well, obviously it may not be obvious to you, but it is a fact of our contracts that we need to reduce part-time and adjunct faculty before we would lay off full-time faculty. So if we eliminated the department of, you know, whatever it is, the English department, I'm not proposing we would do that, but if we eliminated an academic department at a community college, we would first obviously have to eliminate the adjunct faculty and then retain the full-time faculty to the extent that we still had, you know, courses we were offering that needed to be covered. So I think you would end up seeing significant reductions in adjunct faculty across the system, but that is going to impact the community colleges to a greater degree. But then again, you know, we don't really know what the final numbers are going to look like. So that's a little speculative, but I think that there's a little bit more concern for imminent staff reductions there in a bad budget outcome. Yes, Donna, I see you have your hand up.
Donna, you're still muted. Well, Donna's been muting, Ben. There's a question in the chat about generating additional cost-saving ideas that can be explored. I don't know if you have any suggestions on those, Carrie or Ben, or if that's a possibility.
Yes, we are absolutely looking at cost-saving ideas. You know, there are a whole ton of ideas that have come out of the, you know, some of them, you know, fully cooked, and some of them, you know, not ready for prime time, that have been raised by the staff at each institution. So we are casting a wide net. If you have particulars, I mean, the idea that came up in the chat of having staff work from home 2 or 3 days a week during the summer, that actually I had that discussion with my facilities director 2 days ago about the, you know, we did an evaluation of what if we closed the community college campuses on Fridays. Many of the community colleges do significantly reduce hours during the summer when they're, you know, between sessions and when there's limited use of the buildings. And there's been talk about expanding that, and there are real savings to be achieved. You know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings from, you know, from not air conditioning the buildings and from reducing security guards and some other things. It's not as large as we would, you know, it's not large enough to solve the problem, but it is a real contributor. I'm a little hesitant, you know, when we're trying to also grow enrollment and trying to serve students as well as we can. You know, there are downsides to that. You know, being open and convenient and having hours that work with your schedules, you know, that's important to us. And so you know, we'd have to balance the potential impact of that. So, for instance, you know, only having the community college campuses be open 3 days a week during the fall and spring semesters would be pretty awful in terms of our ability to serve students, and I don't think it would be worth it. But during the summer, I think that makes a big that's a very valid suggestion. And we've looked at a whole bunch of other things, changing how we, you know, procure different goods and services that we need, changing how we do scheduling. There are a lot of ideas out there that are being, you know, raised and then evaluated by the staff at all the institutions in the system. So now I'm going to turn to Donna's question. Thank you for putting it in the chat. I'm sorry about your tech issues. Is Charter Oak grouped with universities or grouped with community colleges if 5% tuition increase is implemented in June? The Charter Oak, I think Charter Oak has not increased tuition so far, so their tuition remains flat. We have not taken any action. I believe that Charter Oak is evaluating whether they could increase tuition for the fall. Charter Oak is, because it's in an online institution that is in very direct competition with, I'm not even going to say the names. I don't want you guys looking them up and thinking about it. I mean, we all know it's, Southern New Hampshire and Phoenix and Arizona State. There are a bunch of big Western governors. There are a bunch of big national and regional online institutions which are direct competition. And so, because of that, we are very mindful that we cannot, if we're $500 more expensive than Southern New Hampshire, we will lose tuition because of that. I mean, those are fully accredited, good institutions with offerings that are not unlike the offerings that we provide at Charter Oak, and we're in competition with them. We think we provide a better product. We think our faculty is excellent, and we think our services and student support services, and the fact that we're, here in the state, adds real value to people. But that's not, we don't, we know that there's a lot of price sensitivity in the online education market. So I think that Charter Oak might prefer not to raise tuition and to seek to make up additional revenue through enrollment initiatives. And they're currently evaluating that. The numbers that we have here do not include tuition increases at Charter Oak. Although I got to tell you, Charter Oak, because it's just such a smaller institution than the others, the amount that it would raise from tuition increases would barely change the. I mean, the universities can raise, with 5% increase, they raise, $25 million or $24 million, something like that. The 5% increase at Charter Oak would not produce nearly that dollar, the same level of dollars. At this point, I think they're taking a look and trying to evaluate. I will say that the governor's budget and the appropriations budget was very hard on Charter Oak. Charter Oak has is going to be extremely challenged. However, we may, because it's a much smaller institution, the Board of Regents has some flexibility to shift resources to ensure that Charter Oak is able to continue to stay, provide a full range of courses. I know there's a lot of support for Charter Oak's mission, and we think that they're a valuable part of our system. So I don't believe that you're likely to see 5% increases at Charter Oak, simply because we think that the loss of enrollment that would come from that is so great that it would offset the increase. And that's a reflection of it being an online institution. And you're absolutely right. Their enrollment is up. But I would point out, and here I'm going to be a little bit of a booster. Enrollment is up everywhere. The enrollment this spring at the community colleges was up 3%. And the first-time student enrollment this fall at the universities was up overall, not hugely, but up. And especially up at Central and Southern, which are, our biggest institutions, and the ones that have, the ones that were, I think, suffered some of the biggest drops just because of their size. So we have seen, there is positive signs in enrollment. The pandemic has significantly ended, and a lot of students are, coming back to their higher education. So we, that's the direction we want to be moving. We want to be moving in ways to keep prices, keep our institutions affordable, keep our offerings strong, and grow enrollment. That's the best outcome for the system, and the one that the approach we want to take toward solving our financial problems over a period of time. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I don't see any.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we're good for now. But I will just say, Ben, thank you so much as always. I feel like every time you come in, I know you talk about sounding pessimistic and everything, but again, we also need to be realistic and understand the outcome. So I think all the information is extremely helpful, and it only helps just understand the issue more, because it is more complicated than than it seems at first. So, but and I don't know if you
Yes,
had
but
anything
it's not,
returning.
it's, I appreciate your remarks, and I will have to say that, the SAC is, of all the groups I have to speak to about budget matters, my favorite. I'd rather spend my time educating you than almost any of the other constituencies in the system. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm sorry that I don't have better news. I hope I can return to speak to you in the fall and talk to you about how we dodged a bullet and we're on track to get stronger and stronger. That's my fervent hope, and you should be confident that the entire board and leadership of the system is doing everything in our power to make that happen. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy this beautiful summer weather for this afternoon.
Yeah, you as well, Ben, and thank you for the words. We really appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
have a
you.
great one. And I don't know if there were any concerns, questions about anything we discussed as well. So I just want to make sure give space for that. And I know also Angela put in the chat, but I just also want to say if you do have like a final or anything that any other obligation, because I know it's the last week. For a lot of people, don't feel forced to stay. Venetia, did you have a question?
Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Just a question. So I know a lot of people are getting together and walking to the Capitol on the 17th. I don't know if I'm supposed to speak to everyone about it or not, but everyone's welcome, I suppose. Just to, represent, what we were just talking about the budget cuts and everything, to sort of inform the governor and everyone else who's making decisions. So I guess I'm sure all of the community colleges and everyone who's present here, I'm sure all of them are, getting together. So I think that would be a really great opportunity if anyone wants to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know if there's like do you know if there's like a flyer or like some type of like group of information for that or no?
I don't. From Middlesex, some of the faculty, I think, is getting together. I know for a fact that a few weeks ago, a lot of community colleges and state universities got together. It would be nice if all of us could also sort of go and represent our campuses and all, like, we are the SAC, and if we could bring the information to our senates and governing bodies like student governors, we should be able to sort something out.
Yeah, okay. And
Lena
okay, so
says she has flyers for the 17th, and maybe she could send them over to us
yeah.
through Angelo, if that's okay, Angelo.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah,
you're right.
that'd be great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, so that'd be great. If we have all the information, then we can definitely send it out to everyone and then get something going. But thank you for putting it on the radar. I appreciate it. Have moved on one. Okay. Okay, awesome. Toby, also thank you for that information. Also, just if you didn't see in the chat, Toby put that the community colleges and students have moved to one holding pen. So everyone to come after education and CT now has a one-stop shop. Now has one-stop shopping to make that happen. So that's awesome. Any other concerns or questions too before we close out? Or make sure I get everything. Okay. Well, no worries. I do want to say, I appreciate all the work we've done. I know that there were some goals we had that we didn't get to hit. But I think that with everything going on with the budget, I'm glad we were able to put a lot of focus on that because I think right now that's definitely the bulk of the issue. Yeah, Donna, we're gonna get that information out so everyone has that. But yeah, and I'm also graduating, so I won't be returning. Just want to let you guys know. But I've put my email and I'll put my email again. Just feel free to reach out as we are in these closing weeks. If you have any questions about anything SAC related and all that stuff, and also if you just have any questions in general, just feel free to reach out. But with that being said, I can take a motion to close the meeting at 11:10 a.m. If anyone would love to. First motion, Matt.
First,
Thank you. Wait, can you just say your name? I'm sorry, just so I know.
Samuel Fagerquist from Snuntuck.
Thank you. And then a second. The final second.
I will second it. Finish it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Benicia. Okay. All right. Well, we're all set. You're all free to go. Any questions? Let me know, though. Angela, thank you so much for your help as well.
Thank you, everyone. Congratulations to all those graduating, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Your live stream is stopped and the recording